Today we have a most eminent speaker among us, Professor M.D. Nalapat. He has a long list of achievements. He was appointed India's first professor of geopolitics and UNESCO Peace Chair in 1999. So I'm just giving a very short snapshot. He was previously editor of the Mathrubhumi and the Times of India. Professor Nalapat has originated several concepts, such as that of the proxy nuclear state, Asian NATO, and Hindutva, which posits that the DNA of every citizen of India is the compound of the Vedic, Mughal, and Vedic, Mughal, and Western cultures. His next two books, A Reader in Global Geopolitics and an Overview of India's Foreign Policy, are due in 2 months, published by Manipal University Press and Rupa, respectively. He commutes between Delhi, where he is editorial director of ITV Media Network, and Manipal. On behalf of Prasanna School of Public Health, we welcome you, sir.
Thank you very much, and I'm honored to be here. And allow me to pay my homage also.
Yes, sir.
Rajani Prasanna, for this magnificent gesture, for this extremely magnificent gesture, because it's not what we have that's important, it's what we do with what we have that's important. And you cannot be judged by what you have, but you need to be judged by what you do with what you have. And I think Professor Rajani Prasanna very clearly embodies that particular spirit, that something is of value when it is shared and something is of value when it is given. So in that spirit, this endowment has come, and therefore it's a double honor for me to be allowed to speak here. Now, I'd like to say that I would like to, in a sense, try and explore certain boundaries of certain concepts that we have been using for a very long time. And we have been using this concept of climate change for quite some time in a specific context of weather. Now, that's absolutely, of course, correct. But the point is whether looking at the world around us, looking at the tectonic shifts that are taking place in the world around us, whether it's not important to ensure that this concept of climate be broadened in a way. Now, I'm making the suggestion, frankly, for the first time to the Prasanna School of Public Health, and I don't expect everybody or even most people or even anybody to agree with my point of view, but I'm grateful to you for having given me a forum to express that particular point of view. And that is that let us look at the concept of climate in a slightly more broader concept than what we're talking of in terms of weather. Now, we all know that weather, for example, impacts global geopolitics very significantly. You know, what has been called environmental chaos, environmental degradation, environmental changes in a negative direction have in fact been very crucial drivers of migration. They've been crucial creators of poverty and of so much of misery across the world. So all this has been related to the environment. There's no question about that. Migration, for example, we talk in terms of ideology as a motivation for migration, that, you know, the extremist ideology comes to a particular location and those who are not extremists want to leave that location. Or, for example, you have certain religious exclusivism, for example, in Afghanistan or Pakistan. And as a consequence, those who are Christians, Hindus, people who are even the Shia and the Ahmadiyas, they also will feel the need to migrate. That is correct. Weather is a very important component of geopolitical change. And if you define public health in a slightly broad context of, long back, I used to hear about wellness, you know, WELLNESS, wellness, the concept of wellness. And in my view, health and wellness are interlinked. when we talk of wellness, we are essentially talking of health. And if we are talking of health as an identical to wellness in a sense, then what we're talking of are the different factors that contribute to that wellness. And here we have different factors that also contribute so far as responding to climate events are concerned. One is causation, the causation of climate events. And there it is very, very clear that the importance of policies are paramount. You have over centuries, if I may say so, certain parts of the world, fossil fuels behaving in a way extremely, in a long-term sense, irresponsibly in terms of the effect on the climate. And that has built up a huge, if I may say so, overhang of negativity, which has caused so many of the problems that are there. Now, these problems have not been caused by the people, many of the people who are really undergoing them in the worst degree. Unfortunately, that is the case in life. Today, for example, you have the Ukraine war and you have the concurrent sanctions, and that has caused so many problems in supply chains, in food supply chains, in supply chains of energy systems, and in so many other ways. And who are the worst sufferers? The worst sufferers are the underprivileged countries. They are not responsible for the war in Ukraine. I mean, they are neither Russia, nor Ukraine, nor NATO. Nobody, none of them has anything to do with any of these entities. But yet, they are suffering the after effects, the aftershocks of what has started on 24th February of this year. So the point is that, again, we can, in the language, refer to climate as referring to the overall climate for mankind, the overall, for humankind, my apologies, the overall climate for people, and the overall climate for societies. And we can see whether this climate has improved or this climate has become degraded. And there are different metrics for this. It's not simply a question of weather as weather, but it's also a question of metrics, which of course are related to weather, and some are distantly related, some are closely related, because eventually none of us can escape the reality of weather and our existence, the kind of existence we lead. Nobody can escape the causative factor behind that. So here you have a causation. You have, frankly, short-sighted and irresponsible behavior taking place over generations and taking place even now, if I may say so. I mean, it's a wonder to me that we have now systems that can go to Mars, that can traverse the boundaries of our solar system, and yet we don't have a reliable and capable battery to store solar energy. I think India should be definitely a country that could have developed that battery. Now, what is the systemic problem that is behind the lack of development of an economical alternative to that? Because ultimately, and way back in the past, when we were talking, when we began this Manipal Advanced Research Group, there was a very heavy focus on physics, on nuclear physics particularly. Nowadays, there's a greater focus on geopolitics. In those days, and we were very excited about thorium. We were very excited about fusion energy. Why? Because we were looking at a world in which energy was very, very inexpensive. And you can imagine the benefits that can accrue to humanity if the cost of energy becomes much lower than what it is now. It can make weather changes much more tolerable. It can make working and living conditions much better. It can empower human beings, including the most underprivileged of human beings, because today you have a financial barrier to that empowerment. And with certain geopolitical steps, such as not just the launching of the war in Ukraine, but if I may say so, the raft of sanctions that have just followed one after the other without, in my view, sufficient thought as to the after effects on the countries that are doing the sanctioning and countries that are innocent of any role in the Ukraine war. You can see the enormous cost that this is imposing because of the rise in the cost of energy. An enormous rise. Now, assuming, for example, that that cost was somehow brought down to insignificant levels, imagine the kind of world that we would be living. Imagine the impact of on public health of that kind of a world. And so the question is, what is the cause of this? Is it simply happenstance? Is it simply nature, including nature reacting against some of the misdeeds of humanity? Is it that? Or is it a problem of policy? Because I've always believed, frankly, that both problems and solutions are created through policies. A good policy comes up with solutions. A bad policy results in problems. And we can see that play out, whether it's in our daily lives, whether it's in our countries, our continents, or the whole world. So from that point of view, I wanted to talk in terms of the human environment as not just a continuum of public health, of occupation, of education, of living, in the sense of leisure, but not just a continuum of that, but if I may say so, as not just a continuum, but as mutually reinforcing segments. So a problem in one leads to a problem in the other. A problem in energy supply leads to an immediate problem in, for example, the activities that cause carbon emissions to come in a very large, in a much bigger way. It immediately leads to that. Now, coal. At one time, there was a talk of doing away from coal, and now nobody is talking about that. Doing away from oil and gas. Nobody is talking about that. And today, the reality is that it's difficult to find oil and gas in the market. The prices are going up. The prices of all these other energy feedstocks are also going up, while the prices of energy that could be abundant. We are talking of energy through rainwater. We're talking of energy through fusion or thorium. We're talking of energy through solar, through wind. They are coming down, but not really appreciably, not sufficiently. Solar energy, for example, has been one of the big disappointments, at least so far as I've been concerned, because for about 30 years, I've seen solar energy as being a magic wand for a country like India, which is in this, one thing we don't lack. We may lack a lot of things, but we don't lack the sunlight. And here I am actually sitting in the national capital region of Delhi, and I can assure you that there is no lack of sunlight in the national capital region. There is, if I may say so, a slight excess of that kind of the light and the heat that it generates. But the point I'm trying to say is that if we go into a silo system and we look at public health from the point of view, let's say, of the medical profession or the paramedical profession, or we look at weather from the point of view of the meteorologists, of the specialists in weather, environment from the point of view of the environmental specialists, we are looking, we may not be studying enough the causation, and very importantly, the other part of this coin, which is the effect. It is not just the cause, but the effect. Now, there's nothing very profound in any of that. It's just logic, it's just reason. But the reality is that it's logic and reason that have led to so many, if I may say so, concepts that have been of great help to humanity. So what I wanted to do today, as a matter of fact, I'm sorry, I've been talking a bit too much today, including a few minutes before this particular lecture. But I'd like to say that it is very important, therefore, for us to broad base our study, and perhaps for Manipal, for the Prasanna School of Public Health, to go into a holistic view of this entire concept of climate. And that is why I chose my subject as essentially broadening of the concept of climate change in view of changing realities. And what are the changing realities? The changing realities are, of course, energy, the costs of energy. The changing realities are, of course, climate change and the impact of climate change, the heat waves, etc., that are, for example, causing India to have problems in its wheat production. But in all this, the reality is, if we don't link these various strands together, analyzing just one strand may not be sufficient to come up with conclusions that could be of greater value than if we look at it in a silo mentality. We have a lot of problems actually in scholarship, in the bureaucracy, in the military, in our daily lives, of looking at things through silos, of really not allowing one silo to come into the other. And in some respects, maybe that is welcome, maybe that is necessary. But there are also instances in which it is essential to go beyond silos. Because, you know, I find in many locations, when I'm told that, you know, these are we have got some out of the box thinking, would you like to sit down and discuss that with us? I find that it's out of the box into a different box. So you're basically moving from one box into another box. Or usually that box is being pushed into a different shape, into a different size, but it's not really different. The fact is, when you talk about moving out of the box, you're supposed to be literally jumping out of the box, not into another box, not from one cage of thought into a different cage of thought. And, you know, I know that this may sound a little bit of philosophy, but I think the reality is that the dividing line between science, art, and philosophy is very thin indeed, if indeed it exists at all. So personally, I wanted to give these introductory remarks to you, essentially not to deliver a long lecture, because this is an idea that's been germinating in me for some time, a broad-based concept of climate change, the climate of human society, the climate of human welfare, the climate of human existence that includes social justice, that includes empowerment of different aspects of different segments of society, including the least empowered, the most disadvantaged. It includes public health, it includes work, it includes education, and so many other fields. So expanding that particular concept and going into that particular concept in this expanded fashion, and to see if at different levels, different domain experts, different groups of thinkers can come together and work out solutions that may work out to be a bit better than the solutions we now have. Because let's be honest, you know, we are seeing a tremendous amount of growth of technology. And what am I seeing as somebody who has been studying geopolitics for quite some time? I mean, you know, way back in my days in the Mathrubhumi and in times of India. I mean, I used to go to the Punjab quite often. I used to go to Kashmir very often in the 90s, Punjab in the 1980s. I've always been interested. I've gone to conflict areas, whether it is Syria, Iraq, various other locations. The reality is, quite frankly, that we have to look at today's situation. And is it really a better situation than it was 20 years ago? Or are we closer to what people say rather loosely is World War III? I mean, World War I was an entirely different type of World War from World War II, entirely different in terms of the way the battles were fought, in terms of the ideologies driving those particular battles. Entirely, Tsarist Russia was in World War I, and Soviet Russia in World War II. And heaven alone knows what kind of Russia is going to be there in World War III. But the point is, these are three entirely separate types of existence. If you look at war as something existent, World War I, World War II, and possibly what's going on to World War III will be entirely separate. And in a sense, we are already at war. You know, you have got large and powerful countries, large and powerful entities infiltrating into the metasphere, getting into, for example, our browsing habits and studying patterns of our behavior through metadata, through artificial intelligence, finding out issues that can widen fault lines in society, that can shrink the moderate middle. And a society is as healthy as its moderate middle. It's unhealthy when the fringes become strong, and healthy when the moderate middle remains strong. So we are seeing that take place over the last 20 years fairly systematically. Are we less prone to war and to conflict than we were in the past? I'm not sure. 20 years ago, just looking at 20 years ago, 22 years ago, the beginning of this particular century. Let's not go too far back in the past. I mean, we can go back 600 years, 5,000 years, any kind of years. But let's just go back 22 years to the 21st century. Let's only talk 21st century. When the 21st century began and now, what are the relationships between the major powers? What is the level of trust or mistrust between major powers? What is the ambient noise surrounding societies, within societies, intra and inter-society? From my very imperfect and limited reading, it seems that a climate is being created very similar to the climate that was created before what we call World War I and World War II, because there was a leading up to that climate. In fact, more World War I than World War II, because World War II was almost entirely the creation of 2 or 3 individuals, predominantly the Nazi Party led by Adolf Hitler. I mean, one of the most horrible episodes in human history. But you know, the First World War, well, about 20 years before the war, if you analyze the situation, you will find an increase in anger between countries, an increase in mistrust, an increase in leaders not meeting each other or trusting each other, an increase in efforts at forming alliances, breaking alliances, problems regarding the economy, problems, intra-society problems, social unrest, etc., etc. And finally, all that erupted into a world war. I'm not saying that, you know, the ambient noise caused the war. I'm only saying that we had a form of ambient noise, which in a different form, I am actually seeing today in 2022. Now take artificial intelligence. It's supposed to be something very good for us. It is good for us. But artificial intelligence is also the heart of modern military science. It's the heart of technology and systems that are being created to cause immense destruction. It is artificial intelligence that is basically at the center of the weapons industry, the modern weapons industry in the world today. 20 years ago, that was not the case. 20 years ago, it was a GPS, it was other things, it was bandwidth and so many other things. Today, that bandwidth is used to poison minds, increasingly. I mean, I make a point of getting on different websites, some, all of which, of course, they violently disagree with each other, because they would not even, a person in one website would never even dream of, they'd probably take a lot of punishment before getting onto another website to take a cross-section of websites. Because, I mean, if I may say so, in my career in journalism, for example, or in my career in geopolitics, information is very, very primary. And unfortunately or fortunately, if I can be a little light in a serious subject. I mean, I deal with saints and sinners. And I must confess that the best information comes from the sinners. The saints are wonderful people. They're lovely people to meet, but I really don't get very good information from them about matters which concern me, about geopolitics, about synergies between countries, in societies. They're, basically, they want the world to be wonderful. They want the world to be like them, but I'm not very sure that the world is in any hurry to be wonderful and like them. But unfortunately, sinners are a bit different. They have access to good data. And if you're careful to see that they don't pull fake data on you, well, I think you can find that's very useful. So you must forgive me, but I have a variety of sources. I have a variety of contacts. And through these contacts, I'm not getting a very great feeling about the way we are heading in terms of global tensions, in terms of global welfare, or of course, as you can see, in terms of global ecology in a narrow sense in which it's been taken, but much less the broader sense in which I'd like to take it. So I am very, very glad to have to have an interaction with the people here, because after all, this is something that I've just basically been mulling over in my mind, because I'm a little, looking at all this, looking at this ambient noise, looking at the intra-societal conflicts, looking at the intersocietal conflicts, inter-country, intra-country, and so many other things. Looking at the last 20 years, it's not a reassuring feeling as to what is waiting for us 5 years down the line. So it was in that context, I didn't want to give you a ready-made knowledge, in the sense, a ready-made theory, neatly wrapped up in a box with a ribbon and a very nice, attractively colored ribbon, and I present that to you, because frankly, I don't believe that many of these attractive theories have any relevance in a world in which change is happening with the speed of changes in artificial intelligence. Thank you very much.